Hi, it's Von Hertzog. I'd like to welcome you back to the Social Club, my analog digital hybrid studio. Today I want to try something different. I keep hearing about how AI is going to take over the world, how it's coming for your job and it's coming for mine. And chances are it probably is. It's smart, really smart, but how smart? I want to put it to the test and see how well can Chat GPT design a speaker. Can it do it better than I can? AI versus DIY? Who's going to win? And I have a feeling this is going to be an interesting one. So grab a cup of coffee, pull up a chair, and get comfy. Welcome to the Social Club. Today I want to see how smart AI really is. If I give it a budget of $500 and ask it to design me the best pair of speakers it can, how well is it going to do? And can it do better than me? I'm going to be building two sets of speakers. One according to what AI thinks is the best, and one according to what I think is the best, given the budget. Let's see who wins. Can I build a better speaker than AI can? We're going to find out. I am simply telling AI, here's your budget. $500, go out, build the best speaker you possibly can for the money. It's going to output to me what the speaker box size should be, what the crossover parts should be, and what the frequency crossover is. I'm asking it to do everything. Because, hey, if AI is really that smart, then prove it. Show me that you know how to make an amazing sounding speaker. And then we'll see if you really have what it takes, AI. I don't know if Chat GPT really wants to come from me, but let's find out. You want to go? Let's go. So let's dig into it. Let's set up Chat GPT. Let's give it its marching orders, and let's see what it outputs and gives me to build. All right, now we're going to see if Chat GPT really knows what it's doing. So I have a prompt preloaded in here that I wrote myself that I'm going to read to you now so you know what Chat GPT is being prompted to do. Here's what I told it. I want you to design a pair of studio monitor speakers for me in full. I'll need you to select the parts within the budget and then design the cabinet size based on the selected speaker's characteristics, and you'll need to design the crossover circuit for the speaker so the frequencies are filtered to the correct drivers. Give me a parts list, speaker cabinet dimensions, and crossover design. The budget must stay within the $500 for the parts for the pair. I'm targeting a 4-ohm woofer with a cone size between 5 to 7 inches. Go. Let's see what ChatGPT spits back. That's just wrong. Okay, well, it's spitting a lot of information out here. Given I know the parts that it's trying to recommend, it's telling me that the 8-ohm woofer is actually 4 ohms, but it's not. I didn't like that. Let's try that again. Let's regenerate, because that didn't make any sense to me. See if you can follow directions this time. All right, I think we're actually following the directions properly now. All right, so here's what it's telling me. To design a pair of studio monitor speakers, we will need to select the appropriate drivers, woofers and tweeters, design a crossover network, and determine the cabinet dimensions. Let's start with the parts list, ensuring we stay within $500 budget. Parts list. Dayton Audio RS150 4-ohm 6-inch reference woofer. I'm familiar with these. A 1 1/8 inch silk dome tweeter, 4-ohm. I'm familiar with these as well. Capacitors, inductors, and resistors. It estimates it at $50. All right, so they're coming in at a grand total of $380. So let's see how they broke that out. All right, they're deciding our cabinet design. They're giving us the option of sealed or ported. I'll have to decide. Crossover design, they're crossing over at around 2000. Okay. They're giving me cabinet dimensions. Okay. All right. That was better. You at least picked a 4-ohm woofer that time. So good work, ChatGPT. Seriously, though, that first response did not instill confidence in me. But let's see. It looks like it spit out a actual speaker that I can build, so I'm going to give it a shot. I noticed that they did not spend the full budget. I think, what, 380 is where they came in? So now I'm going to have to figure out what parts I want to use. Okay, so now that we know that Chat GPT has picked its own parts, it's time for me to get down to picking my parts for my design. So I have a bunch of speakers laid out here, and I'm going to go through them and talk about which ones I'm going to select and why. But first, let's start with the ones at the end. This is the epic 7-inch dual voice coil subwoofer from Dayton Audio. I love these things. I use them in my SBH7S design. They're extended range subwoofers, so they go into, or they play up to about 3K without any cone breakup. The carbon fiber cones, really good. Low sensitivity. They have a low sensitivity. I think they're 83 decibels. That woofer, the 5 1/4 is, I think, 81 decibels. But the 7-inch takes a ton of power. They're dual voice coil, and you can push 300 watts to them, and they're going to pump. They have a huge X max. They move a lot of air, but they're too expensive for this. They're $125 per driver. So I don't want to use up 50% of our budget and only have woofers to show for it. So they're out. Next up is the Dayton Reference Series 7-inch speakers. This is the aluminum. This is the paper cone. Why different cones? They sound slightly different. Everything else about the speaker is the same, basket, motor structure, etc. But the cone material makes a big difference in how a speaker ends up sounding. The aluminum tend to be a bit more sterile and crisp, and as a studio engineer, that's exactly what I want. I don't want anything hiding behind the fuzziness. The paper speaker is a bit softer and a bit smoother around the edges, which if you're listening back for hi-fi, you might prefer. But if you're listening for the studio, you might want the aluminum. Doesn't matter. We're moving on to the next ones. Next up here is the 6-inch driver from Seas. It's 15 centimeters. It's the H1141. These are made in Norway. These are fantastic speakers. I've used them in some other designs, and it's similar to what Amphion uses in their 115 design and 215 designs. However, these are 4-ohm drivers, where the speakers that Amphion are using from Seas are 8-ohm drivers. I like the characteristics on the 4 a little more. Plus, I got them on a clearance sale from Matasound that I could not beat. So I like those a lot. Next to them, at the same size in the same basket and magnet, is another speaker from Seas. This is the H1455. This is an 8-ohm speaker, but it has a paper pulp cone. These sound really nice. Big fan of these. I'm thinking about putting them into a design with some speakers down here at the end, but we can talk about that another time. This is the driver that AI chose. This is the 6-inch reference from Dayton Audio. 4-ohm, finally, and it's a really good speaker. I use this in my VH180 studio monitor designs. I use this in the VH150, the smaller one. And then next to it, one from Dayton, one from Seas. These are great for small, highly detailed studio monitors and bookshelf designs. They're really good. They sound great. They respond great. I like them a lot. These are some tweeters from Peerless that I really liked. And they carried them at Parts Express for the longest time. And now you have to buy 1,000 of them if you want to buy one. You can't buy one. Minimum order 1,000. I don't see anyone ordering 1,000 of these in the near future, so they're probably going to stay sold out. So I'm not going to be using them in my design. That said, they play really low. It's an aluminum tweeter, and I love the way they sound. The next tweeter over, this thing. This is what I pair with this in my VH180s. This is the Seas 1825. It's a 6-ohm aluminum and magnesium tweeter. Very heavy duty. This thing plays down to like 1500 hertz. These tweeters image better than almost any other tweeter I've ever heard. It's why I chose them for the VH180. That said, they're pricey. They're over $90 each. So you're looking at $180 for the pair for these, which why for this design is going to disqualify it. However, like I said, I use it in the VH180 and VH150. It is a magnificent tweeter. Highly recommend it. This is one of my favorite tweeters of all time. This is from Seas, the H1212. I love this thing. Made in Norway, really good imaging. Aluminum magnesium tweeter. This one is silver though, where the other one was black. Hexagrid protecting, Sonamax surround. Love them. You've probably seen these before, these little peerless silk tweeters with the little bit of the waveguide built in around it. I think Parts Express uses this in their Hitmaker kits. I have a bunch of these because they're cheap. They're like $20, $25 a piece, and they sound really good. And if you're more of a fan of that silk tweeter sound over the aluminum, you might prefer them. I do like the waveguide on it. It does help with the sound dispersion and helps keep a really good 3D image. And then these little guys here, these are the H1283s. This is a smaller, it's 22 millimeter diaphragm, and very nice Sonamax surround again. Hexagrid again, but a slightly larger hex pattern. These are what I think I'm going to pair with these reed paper woofers, because I've done some tests and I liked how it sounded, but I didn't get enough time to really play with them. So to be determined. I'm going to try those maybe in a future video. But here are all the speakers, right? So which ones am I going to go with? Here we go. This is what I'm using. I'm using these Seos woofers, the 1141s. Love these. And I'm going to be pairing them with one of my all-time favorite tweeters, the H1212. So this is what I'm putting up against AI. But there's a twist. This is what AI designed. Now, I offset the tweeters in this because that's how I do it in the VH180. And what I like about it is that it changes the space to the edges, which helps with diffraction. So that goes a long way. Silk tweeter in here, the Dayton silk tweeter, Dayton aluminum reference, 4 ohm. They're in here. This is their design. So it's my design. What am I going to put up against it? What about these speakers? Now, here's the trick. I didn't just build these. I had built these out prior, but it's using the same drivers, and I'm going to show you where my twist is going to be, because, hey, I'm trying to use the whole budget. If I have $500 and I'm trying to make the best possible speaker I can, is this the best I can do? Or can I stretch my dollars a little bit further and really separate me from the AI design? Let me put these next to the AI ones so you see what they look like. All right, so AI's design, my design. But I didn't use up the whole budget when I made these. And to be honest, that feels like dereliction of duty. I mean, I am genuinely trying to see if I can take a $500 budget and, using my human smarts, maximize it, using sales and discount codes and whatever I can to get the price down so that I'm really getting the best speaker I can build for the money. So, can I build a better speaker than these? Yeah, let me show you. Instead, I built these. Look at these things. You might recognize them. They look pretty similar to an Amphion 215, but they're a little different. These are the 4 ohm drivers, but it is an MTM design. And let's face it, if I'm really trying to make a better speaker, which do you think is going to sound better just by looking at it? Yeah, your instincts are right. These are going to sound better, but I don't know that for a fact yet. I've designed the crossovers in the computer. Okay, let's take a quick look at the crossover circuit here for the DIY speakers that I designed. Using a 2 millihenry inductor and a 15 microfarad capacitor on the low frequency circuit going to the woofers. If you look, I also used a 220 nanofarad capacitor to lay across parallel with the inductor. That helps push down the frequency even further and lessen the cone breakup out at about 10K and lessen the interference between the woofer and the tweeter. On the low circuit, I use a 3.9 ohm resistor going into a 10 microfarad capacitor and a 0.33 millihenry inductor to ground. That's it. That's the circuit. It's not super complicated, but it's well designed and it does the job nicely. So I know what parts I'm going to use in both of these designs. AI gave the parts that they wanted for this. However, when I put it in the computer and I checked the software to see what Chat GPT recommended for the crossover for this, I was disappointed. Look. I mean, seriously, guys, what on earth is that? Chat GPT, I expected more from you. That's not the shape that a speaker response should have. That's terrible. That doesn't look so good. But let me show you what happened when I made a minor adjustment. All I did here was modify some of the existing values for the components used. And as you can see, I added a resistor on the high-end circuit and used a parallel capacitor against the low-end inductor to help push down that cone resonance at 10K. Now, these parts are subject to change by the time I get finished designing the crossover for it, but this is what I'm going to start with. So for the sake of this contest, I'm going to build the crossover the way that Chat GPT designed it, and I'm going to take a measurement. Then I'm going to make my adjustments and take another measurement. And then we're going to see if Chat GPT or I could build a better crossover circuit given the same parts. This is all me. This is my design, head to toe. But I was able to get this in for under $500. All these parts under $500. Now, the finish on both these cabinets are just painted black. I did not include the cost of the finish in the build. Reason being, there's lots of different ways you can finish a speaker, and there's lots of different costs that can be associated with it. You can go from paint all the way up to very nice, expensive wood veneers. I don't know which way you're going, and honestly, none of that affects the sound of the speaker itself. That's why I'm not bothering with it. These are painted black, used for the studio, Duratex, very durable. I'm happy with it. But that's why it's not considered to be part of the budget. Now, what I did for these and these is I put in terminals. I set it up so I have the tweeter and the woofer on two different sets of posts so we can keep the crossover external. Because like I said, we need to test this and put it against their design to see like, oh, there's a better way to do this. And we will test my tweak to see if it did actually improve it. And if not, what values should I choose? And what does it take to get this thing to sound good? For these, I have the crossovers designed and I grabbed the parts, but I'm doing it externally as well because I want to build the crossovers externally. That way, if I need to make any adjustments, I'm not stuck with the crossover that looked good on paper, but didn't perform in the real world. All of this is going to be external crossover parts. Now, at the end, when I finalize the crossover, then I can build it and install it inside the cabinets. But I'm not doing that ahead of time because I'm not 100% sure it's going to sound great. That's what the testing portion is for. You have to do tests when you're building speakers, or otherwise, how are you going to improve it? If you don't know what you've got, you don't know how to make it better. So we're going to test Chat GPT. We're going to see what their crossover circuit sounded like. And then we're going to see if my tweaks made it better. And then we're going to test the design I built for this. That's the idea. That's what we're doing. Let's get down to business. I want to show you the crossover parts that I'm going to be using for each and why I chose different parts based on different brands and materials. So let's check it out. All right, so now we're going to talk about the crossover parts we're going to be using for the different designs. I'm going to be using a thicker inductor on these because they handle more power. These, the drivers aren't rated for enough power to warrant going up to a 15 gauge inductor. These are going to do fine on a 18 gauge inductor. And to show you what that looks like, this is an 18 gauge inductor, okay? That's 2 millihenries, 18 gauge. I'm going to be using a 15 gauge in here. Now, if this is 2 millihenry and this is 2 millihenry, but 18 gauge, look at the size difference. Much bigger. This handles much more power RMS, which means when you're pushing a lot of power through it, you won't hit that saturation point to where things start to lose their dynamics and distort a bit. You can get that if you overload your inductor. You're not going to get that here. We're going to have plenty of bandwidth to run the current through here. But when it gets down to the capacitors, do different brands of capacitors really matter? Yeah, they do. They matter a lot. I've done lots of testing here. I've built lots of speakers. I've done lots of testing with different capacitors. I've critically listened to see what the different characteristics are of each capacitor. Even though they might be the same value, they're not identical. They might be made of different materials. They might have a different size to them. The point I'm trying to make is not all capacitors are equal just because they show the same value. I've had people telling me that that's bullshit, that, you know, a capacitor that's rated for the same value is going to sound the same. If that's true, why would we swap them out? Why would we choose different ones? We do it because it's there. Just because you can't tell the difference doesn't mean it doesn't make one. These are Auden transformers from Germany, and they sound great. I use them a lot. If I'm on the low frequency circuit, I like to use Jansen. I like Jansen capacitors a lot. I like how they sound. They're nice and creamy on the low end, but still very detailed. Very nice. But if I'm talking about what's the best I can get the high frequency circuit to sound, I'll show you what I go with. These are Clarity Cap CSA capacitors. I love these things. Very highly detailed, very smooth dispersion, very, very good. They sound great. These are made in Wales. And this is an 8.2 microfarad cap. Now, this is also an 8.2 from Solon, which are made in France. Look at the size difference. Do you see what we're talking about here? These are rated the same, but they don't look anything the same, and they don't really sound the same. The Solon's great. It's very detailed, and I like using it as a more affordable capacitor. The CSA is a big upgrade. Higher quality ingredients inside make for better sound, and I love these things. So in both of these designs, I will be using Clarity Cap CSA capacitors on the high frequency circuits, and I will be using Jansen caps for the low frequency circuits. If I had the budget to go Clarity Cap CSA all around, I would. That's what I do on my VH180s. I love them. They sound fantastic. But we're trying to do things a little bit more budget conscious here, and I'm just squeaking under the $500 budget with these bad boys. So high frequency circuit gets it, Jansen on the low frequency, no regrets. Given the budget that we're trying to stay within, this is the best I could come up with. You know the deal. These are what we're comparing now. These are the speakers, AI, DIY. Computers design, my design. Can human ingenuity do it? Did I design a better speaker than this? We're going to find out. The parts are different. These parts are made in Taiwan. These parts are made in Norway. Here's what I'm saying. Seas has a very, very, very long history of designing, building, and supplying high quality drivers to the world of hi-fi. Parts Express, they carry Dayton Audio, and Dayton Audio does a pretty good job. If you're looking budget conscious, it's hard to beat some of the values you can get from Dayton Audio. And again, even in my own designs like the VH180, I'm using Dayton Audio reference drivers. I don't care for their tweeters as much as their woofers, but that's personal taste. It's not to say their tweeters are bad. They're not. Plenty of people love them. I am partial to Seas when it comes to the tweeter design. I use Seas tweeters in pretty much every design I build. It's not always the same tweeter because I want different characteristics sometimes, but they have given me the best imaging, the best detail and separation and clarity. That's why I go with them. Again, Parts Express, Dayton Audio, good on a budget. If you have a little bit more of a budget, go with Seas. That is something a human knows to do, and Chat GPT might not be smart enough yet. Maybe after Chat GPT watches this video and steals all my information, maybe it'll be smart. Maybe. Hope not. So now there's not a lot to do except build these crossover circuits and test these different speakers to see how they actually sound. So I am going to externally assemble these crossovers so that we can test the speakers before we commit to the final crossover designs. And then when we're done, we're going to fire them up and compare. Thanks for coming along. I can't wait to see how this turns out.
Okay, so this is what Chat GPT thinks a good speaker's frequency response should look like. Now, I've stitched in from 200 hertz down to get the general roll-off for the speaker because I don't have an anechoic chamber, so guess what? This is the best I can do. But it will give you an accurate representation of the bass response sub 200 without room interference. But look at that drift from like, what, 4K upward? From 4K to 15K, over that 9 kilohertz of frequency bandwidth, you are rising about 10 decibels. That's just absurd. Absurd. So yeah, I don't believe that's going to be a good speaker response. Sorry. Okay, now I'm going to tweak it with my modifications and swap the parts out for what I think is going to make for a better speaker response. Okay, this is a much better response. I mean, look at this. That's ruler flat across that mid-range, which is going to make for a really good sounding speaker. There's a bit of a rise, and you still have that peak up there at about 15K. Again, I just leveled this thing out, but I think that this is a large improvement from this, which, I mean, look at that. That's terrible. Switching to this again, much better look. So this is what we're going to use as the crossover for the Chat GPT design speaker. I'm still going to review it because I can't review the other one all that well with that frequency response. So I at least want to give it a fighting chance. So I'm going to use this crossover because I'm happy with the response. And again, the low end is stitched in to give you an idea of how the roll off is. Stitched in at 200 hertz. Now let me get the crossover set up so that we can take some measurements for the DIY speaker I designed. And there it is. There's the frequency response for the MTM speaker that I designed. Now, this is a flatter response from 100 hertz onward, this is where the AI design speaker dipped a bit here at like 300 hertz up to like 800 hertz. But this is flatter. Now, you get a little bit of a dip at 3K and a little bit of a boost at about 11K. That being said, they aren't giant boosts or dips. You're talking 1.5 to 2 dBs max. And this is a very, very detailed speaker. And this frequency response is really going to allow it to shine without getting too fatiguing. Again, at 3K, you can get a little bit of shrillness there. I don't mind having that tiny little dip there. It's almost like a tiny de-esser to a degree. But I'm really happy with how this frequency turned out. I'm excited to get to listening to it and seeing what this thing ends up sounding like. Because on paper, it's looking amazing. I built this spreadsheet to make it easy for you guys. So if you want to be able to go in and look at the parts I used and grab them for yourselves, I included links to make it very easy so you can grab everything you need. The link is going to be in the description for this video. So you'll be able to view this spreadsheet and grab the parts that you need to build these speakers out if you're so inclined. So the AI speaker, it estimated was going to come in at about 380, but knowing how to make the most out of my money, I was able to grab those parts needed for $335, which is good. To make the tweaks to get the crossover adjusted to where I'm happy with it, that pushed the price to $379.80, which is just under $380, which is still well under the $500 budget. But as you can see, I adjusted the values on the low end and added the parallel capacitor to go across it, and adjusted the numbers on the low end as well and added a resistor. And that's what really helped flatten that out and get that response to be respectable. And here is mine. So coming in at $499.93, I am just under the wire with hitting the target here. But this would not have been possible had I not been able to grab the woofers for only $39 a piece. And here you can see in my email, I was able to get these things for only $39 a piece, which is absolutely phenomenal. I grabbed 6 of them at $39. Can't beat it. This is the spec sheet for the woofer. Nice, as you can see, nice and flat. Here it is for the tweeter. Again, nice and flat. You might be able to hear Ralph snoring in the background. Here is the sheet for the 8 ohm woofer. You know, you're going to have the same power handling, etc. And finally, here is the tweeter. Phenomenal. Love this thing. One of my favorite tweeters ever. As you can see, it can take 220 short term, 90 long term. So that's why we went with the bigger inductors. These speakers as a whole can take more power, 200 short term. You know, so we're looking at what? 620 short term it can handle. So yeah, you can throw a 350 hour mess at these things and they're going to take it. But I'm going to take this spreadsheet. I'm going to share it with you guys. And you can come in here. I have all the parts broken down with links to make it easy if you want to come in and order these parts. The prices are valid for the time of the video. You know, anything past that, I can't forecast how prices are going to change. But I just wanted to show you how everything was broken down. So if you wanted to build these things yourself, you can. And I made it easy enough to just click on the links and go grab the stuff. All right. It's been 2 months since I started this video, since I started listening to these speakers. I finished these speakers back in August. It is now the end of October. So I have taken a lot of time to listen to these things, to get used to them. I worked on them individually. I worked on them side by side, A/Bing back and forth so I could tell the difference between. I listened to a bunch of my favorite music from Tidal in very high quality. I streamed it, I listened to it, and you know what? I have some thoughts. Before I get too far ahead of myself, don't forget to like and subscribe. So let's get to those thoughts. Thought 1, Chat GPT can't do it alone. The crossover that Chat GPT designed and I built is ear shredding. Look at the graph. You can see how it just keeps running up. And by 15K, you're 10 decibels above what your baseline for the speaker should be. That isn't good. That is ear shredding. It is very fatiguing. Even with a silk tweeter, a soft dome tweeter, you're still getting ear fatigue because it's just playing frequencies, high frequencies, louder than they should be played. And it takes a toll on your ears. I was able to make a few tweaks and get it flat and at least a bit more enjoyable. Check that out. And as you can see, that's a much nicer frequency response curve. How was I able to do that? It wasn't hard. ChatGPT, I don't know how it was deciding the parts to use. It suggested a couple Dayton audio parts that don't exist. Like it was asking for capacitor values and inductor values that were close, but just off. Like asking for a 15.9 capacitor when they make a 15 or a 16. So I don't know where 15.9 came from. Same with like a 0.64 millihenry inductor. They make a 0.65. I don't know who's making 6.4s. The point I'm trying to make is it had close but no cigar kind of values to where it was like really close to something, but then not quite right. And honestly, it's just not as good at it as someone with a bunch of experience. ChatGPT might be great at other things, but when it comes to building speakers, it still has a lot to be desired. That crossover is proof. Like the crossover it designed does not sound good. But with just swapping values of parts and adding a resistor, I was able to get that into a nice, beautiful, usable speaker that you can listen to and enjoy. I went with 18 gauge inductors for the Dayton audio speakers. As I had mentioned earlier, the power handling of those speakers don't warrant going up to a larger bandwidth inductor. It's just, you're wasting your money at that point. You're never going to saturate it. With the big MTM design I built, the DIY design, I did go with 15 gauge inductors because those speakers can handle a lot more power. You can throw a lot of power at those things and they will hold up. That's part of Seos's philosophy and design of how they build their speakers. They're built like tanks. Now, that's not to say that you can't still crash a tank. You can. But if you know what you're doing, it's pretty difficult. So, how do I feel about these speakers? Well, like I said, the Chat GPT designed crossover is not useful for me. If you're over 70 and your hearing is shot above 12K, they might work for you. But for the rest of us that can still hear into the 15, 16, 17,000 range, you don't want your ears being shredded. And that is what the original crossover was doing. And sure, it sounded nice for the first 1 or 2 minutes, but it was just fatiguing because it was too high and it was so much higher than the rest of the program material that it just didn't sound good. But like I said, making a few couple tiny tweaks to it made all the difference in the world. It totally worked. And it turned it into a usable speaker that I'm going to give you the designs for. I'm going to give you the designs for how to build the Dayton Audio 5 1/4 bookshelf speaker, studio monitor, whatever you want to use it for. I've designed the crossover to be flat enough to be used as a studio monitor at this point. It still has some really high-end information up top, like the tweeter has a bump at about 15K. And that still
there, but it's only like 2 or 3 decibels up now, which is not bad. It lowered the distortion on it by going to the different crossover. It's just a better speaker, and you can build it. I'm just going to give you the plans for it. So it's not hard. But the speakers I designed and I built, how do they sound? Fantastic. Look, I've been building speakers for a long time, so this isn't something new to me. I know what I'm doing when it comes to it. But I wasn't sure if I could take a $500 budget and beat a computer that knows everything. But we're learning. It knows a lot about a lot, but it doesn't know everything about everything. And when it comes to speakers, it has some deficiencies. But I was able to account for those deficiencies. Look, when I first gave Chat GPT its marching orders, said pick a 4-ohm woofer, it picked an 8-ohm woofer. So its information that it's recorded isn't even correct, which is one of the reasons we have to be wary of AI. Just because it thinks it knows something doesn't mean it's right. And there's plenty of instances where that's been proven true already. Maybe you could ask Chat GPT for suggestions for woofers and tweeters to use. But again, I don't know how accurate it's going to be if it's returning improper values. The speaker I built, the DIY speaker, the MTM with the Seos 5 1/4 woofers and the aluminum dome tweeter, sound holographic. If I'm comparing the two speakers and I want to say what's the biggest difference between them, they both hit almost the same frequency range. There's not much extra bass gain by going to the second MTM woofer in the MTM. It's just there's not a lot of extra bass from that speaker. They're almost even going down. But where this speaker really shines is in its soundstage and imaging. And again, that's why I go with these tweeters. I use this Seos tweeter in a lot of my different designs because it sounds so good and it sounds holographic. And the soundstage sounded wider. It sounded deeper, much deeper, and just overall bigger. It sounded more natural. I could hear a lot more detail from my DIY design than I could from the AI design. And that just is going to come down to the parts. As I had mentioned earlier in the parts selection portion of the video, Parts Express parts are great when you're on a budget. But if you have the little extra money to spend, it can take you so much further down the road. It can get you so close to having very, very high quality speakers that you built yourself. And let's be real, that's the dream, isn't it? To be able to get the quality of maybe an Amphion speaker without dropping $4,500 on a pair for them. If I can build them for $500 and they're selling them for $4,500, what's the difference? Is there any? Yeah, there's going to be some differences. They're using a waveguide, I'm not. But when you drill down to the nitty gritty, I've essentially built a very similar speaker, which I prefer the response curve on. I prefer that it doesn't have the waveguide, and a speaker I prefer to listen to. When I put on Tidal yesterday to kind of do my last final listen through before I came here to give you all my thoughts, I listened to Adia by Sarah McLachlan, the single mix, not the album mix. The definition in the strings and the bass is just not there on the Dayton Audio speaker. You can hear that it's playing the frequencies, but the texture and the depth and the definition to it is vacant. It's just not there. So I think the Dayton Audio speakers could be a good studio monitor for you. If you're on a budget, you need something nice and flat that's going to give you the mixing levels or the ability to make the correct choices in mixing. That said, the caveat is the detail is not there. The frequency response is there. The detail and depth is not. That's the biggest difference. If I had to say what's the difference between these two speakers, when I'm A-Bing back and forth between them, what do I notice to be the difference? The sound quality is phenomenal on the DIY speaker with the Seos drivers. It is everything I'd expect out of a $5,000 speaker, but I made it for $500. And it's possible. Now, you might not be able to find these woofers for the same price I paid, and that's because I got them on a clearance sale. The 4-ohm drivers were hard to come by, and Seos isn't manufacturing them right now. I had reached out to them looking for a data sheet on the specs specifically for the 4-ohm woofer, and they didn't have them. I had to source them from elsewhere because it's not a speaker they regularly produce. They usually make the 8-ohm versions, which is what Amphion uses. But I wanted the 4-ohm woofer so I could get an 8-ohm load on an MTM, and that's what it's doing here. And it sounds amazing. Very easy to drive speakers. I'll put the impedance graphs up for both of them here.
As you can see here, the tweaked crossover that I did. Now, I did end up adjusting some of the parts from the initial on-paper design, but it ended with a very easy-to-drive speaker. You have one dip down to about 3 ohms at about 3 kilohertz, but it's a nice, smooth, easy response for your amp. And for my DIY speaker design, here's the impedance graph. As you can see, very easy to drive. 7.5 ohms is the lowest it drops, and that's at 200 hertz. Everything else is 8 or above. Very easy speaker to use with a variety of amps. And it can eat a bunch of power. You can probably throw 350 RMS at these things.
So AI versus DIY. I'll be honest with you. When I'm making the comparison here, when I did the majority of my listening to the AI design speaker, I wasn't using the AI crossover. It took me very little amount of time to understand that that crossover was whacked and it needed help. I was able to do that, and I was able to get it into a much more usable range. And so that is the speaker that I listened to and compared, because I want to compare as close as I can apples to apples. I know that the speaker that AI designed is bunk based on the crossover. But by fixing the crossover, I was able to bring that speaker back into contention. And could it compete? Yeah, fairly well. Again, if I didn't have the DIY Seos speakers here to A/B them to, I would think that the Dayton sounded really good, because they do sound really good. Like, they're a very even response, but again, they lack the depth and detail and soundstage that I get from the Seos drivers. Now, part of that can be that I went to an MTM, so I've literally made the soundstage projection bigger, but the drivers themselves is what really is the difference here. The difference is the drivers themselves and the quality that Seos produces. So you don't want to pay $70 for one Seos tweeter when you can get a pair of Dayton ones for $60, right? Yeah, you do. Spend the $140 on the tweeters and you'll know where your money went. They sound a lot better. Not trying to use hyperbole here. I'm trying to tell you, like, these things are a lot better. If you have the budget, you can put a speaker like this together. If you can find the woofers like I found for $39 each, it becomes a no-brainer. You know, I was lucky enough to catch a Matasound sale where I caught them on clearance as they were going out. I bought 6 of them. I put 4 of them in here, and the other 2 went in the 5 1/4 bookshelf speaker I showed you earlier in the parts selection process. These sound so good. They're just remarkably good. I love these things. If you want the design for that, drop me a comment. You know, being that the woofers are harder to come by now, I don't know if you're going to be interested in trying to build these out. But I know there's still some for sale on eBay. You can find them there. Maybe send Seos a message. They're on Instagram. Send them a message. Tell them that you want the 4 ohm 1141s back in service. That you saw Von Hertzog build a bunch of really great ones, and you want to do the same thing. Let them know. Ralph is sighing over here. He's tired. He's on the couch sleepy now. So all in all, here's what I'll say. Can AI do it? Not yet. Can't do it yet, but it's not far off. With a little bit of coaching, Chat GPT could end up being a very useful source in the future. But until someone properly trains it in speaker building, it's not going to be your savior. Your savior is you. You want to make a DIY speaker, do it yourself. Ask Chat GPT for help if you need it, but understand that what they're giving you isn't gospel, and it might not even end up working. But if you understand what you're doing, you might be able to modify what it gives you to get it to where you need it to be. Like I said, it's not giving it to you out of the box. And when I did my comparisons to compare, I didn't even use the Chat GPT crossover because it sounded terrible. I used the one that I tweaked and fixed. And that's how I knew I would be able to compare it. And listening to them side by side, both are good speakers. If I only had one pair, I'd want the DIY speakers I built, the MTM. They sound better, you know? But I am not at all upset with the Dayton audio speaker that I could build with parts for under $500, you know? So I'm going to put the links in the description for you to grab those parts if you want and build that speaker for yourself. You can listen to it, see what you think. And if you really want to get tricky, you could even use a different tweeter. You could put a Seos tweeter in there. You might be pleased. Now, the crossover is not going to hold up the same way. You'd need some adjusting on it, but hit me up. That's my specialty. Let me know what you're looking to do, and I can tell you how you want to do it. So thanks for coming along and watching this video today. I hope you learned something. If you did, please give me a like and subscribe. Come back, watch more videos. I'm going to be doing more speaker building videos in the future. So come along if you want to see what I'm up to. And until next time, this has been Von Hertzog from the Social Club.